So as the monks were telling Venerable Siddhina yesterday, the Buddha taught the Dharma for the sake of dispassion, not for the sake of passion. So here it's referring to sensual pleasure, but we can have passion for other things in our lives besides sensual pleasure. We can have passion for the Dharma or passion for service or whatever. But what we really need to look out for is the passion that feeds the ego, that feeds craving, that the passion that pushes us into negative actions such as lying and so forth. And to see that from our side we have a strong habit in that direction, and from the external environment it feeds that. And yet if we want liberation, we have to be able to see through that kind of illusory pleasure and have confidence in a higher state of happiness, a higher purpose to our life than just chasing things that give us immediate pleasure or substantiate our feeling of self. So it takes some time, and we need to really look closely and see how our mind operates, how we're chasing passion and ignoring dispassion, how we're increasing the sense of self, not decreasing it. So we have to notice that, and then also see the disadvantages very clearly, not just intellectually say those things have pitfalls, but really to see by examining our own experience and examining how we recreate samsara every day. And in that way, seeing the faults of that. And that will give us the determination to put effort into overcoming chasing passion and substantiating the self. So let's generate the joyous effort to do that, the determination and self-confidence that we can do that, and to overcome these obstacles for the long-term purpose of being of the greatest benefit to all living beings by attaining Buddhahood. Okay. So it really takes some energy and effort, especially at the beginning when our understanding is much more conceptual and intellectual, to put in to really scrutinize our own experience and see how feeding the sense of self and running after immediate pleasure actually kills or overwhelms or obscures our internal yearning for liberation, for ultimate stable peace. Okay, so you'll see in the Lam Rim, most of the topics, they talk about the benefits of this and the disadvantages of that. So it's kind of like promotion. Yeah. Don't use that soap, laundry soap. Use this one. It's much better. But this is how our mind works. And if we can really come to see the faults in chasing sense objects, then that will, really help us. Then it becomes much easier to resist it. Whereas if our understanding is only intellectual, then it becomes, well, I shouldn't chase these things, but I really like them and I want to, And that's because our understanding hasn't gone from intellectual into experiential. So it takes that time of, doing the analytic, or what Lama used to call checking meditations, that really think about the teachings and apply the teachings to our own life experience. Those are incredibly important. Simply calming the mind is nice, but it doesn't bring that kind of awareness of how the mind operates. So we left poor Sudana. Actually, is it poor Sudana? He got himself into this jam. Nobody else did. But he is poor Sudana because his afflictions, his ignorance really overwhelmed him. And he was just rebuked by the other monks. And so this is how the precepts are usually made, is that other monks find out about what somebody did. In this case, he admitted it himself. Well, actually, he didn't. First, they saw he was getting thin and sick, and they asked him what was happening. Or in other precepts, sometimes the lay people complain, and say, you had some monastic who went off and did this, and like, huh? And so then the other monks gather together and they talk to the offender. And then they take the issue to the Buddha afterwards. And then the Buddha sets up a precept. And the person who first did that action, in this case Sudana, that person is not considered as having committed a parajika because the precept didn't exist at the time they did it. So he got off easy. I think he's able to remain in the Sangha, but we'll see. Okay. So now he's going in front of the Buddha. Yeah. So imagine, that you just slept with your former partner to ease your parents' pressure on you. And then all your Dharma friends found out about it. And now you're in front of the Buddha and you know that he knows. Yeah. How are you going to feel? So the Buddha said, and Buddha always starts this out whenever there's a problem. He doesn't say, I heard you did blah, blah, blah. He always asks a question to clarify the information. So he never accuses, he asks a question. Okay, so is it true, Sudana, that you had sexual intercourse with your former wife? So So is it true or is it not true? And he has to say, it is true, Master. The Buddha, the Master, rebuked him. Foolish man, it is not suitable, it is not becoming, it is not proper, it is unworthy of a recluse, it is not allowable, it is not to be done. So even though there was no precept at that time, the feeling was that the Buddha assumed, probably because all the other recluses at that time were celibate. Or maybe, I don't know if all of them were. There were probably some who were monkeying around. And but he assumed that they understood that. And Sudina apparently didn't see, remember when he dived into the woods, it said he didn't see any fault. Okay, so he had some kind of ignorant block there. So this also means that just because something isn't explicitly prohibited doesn't mean that we shouldn't use our good judgment to assess whether to do it or not. Okay? And it usually comes, well, it does come in our posada. And it says if there are other activities that are like the ones that the Buddha prohibited, we should abandon those. So even if they're not spelled out, to use our wisdom and abandon things that resemble the prohibited activities. And if there are prescribed activities, because the Buddha also prescribed a number of things that the Sangha should do, then even if they're not listed, we should do them. Okay? So in this line, I'm going to go off on a divergent for a minute. If we look nowadays, there are many things that are available and that happen in our society that are not explicitly governed by the precepts. And yet I'm sure if the Buddha were here today, that there would be precepts regarding them. Okay? So what about internet use? If you're a Sangha member, there's no precept about not going to porn sites. Now you may shake your head and go, oh my God, who's going to porn sites? At Abhayagiri Monastery, they have the private email passwords to everybody's account. And they check from time to time to see. Maybe it happened, I don't know, in their community, but I've heard it happening in other communities. Okay? And so people say, but there's no precept about going to porn sites. Well, is that an activity that's to be done if you're a Sangha member? No, no way. Okay. Why not? Well, it's very much in line with other things the Buddha prohibited. Okay, so even though there's no explicit precept, you should use your inner wisdom and figure out that is not conducive to keeping my ordination and to progressing along the path. Okay? So there's all sorts of situations that come up, safety situations, the situations of how things are perceived by other people, and it gets really kind of difficult in society sometimes. In American society, people like to hug each other a lot. And so sometimes you're standing there and, most of the nuns here have had the experience of some guy coming up like this, and we're just standing there like that, and yeah, we try and go like this, which means this. But, we're like, and, or sometimes we do shake hands with men because that is accord with the culture, and it kind of, their hands are out anyway, so you grab one, to prevent them from hugging you. But sometimes they still hug even, yeah. But they quickly learn through our response, that that's not so good to do, because it's not like once they have our arm around us, we reciprocate, okay? On the other hand, the Theravada nuns, they're like frozen like this. And sometimes that can make people feel uncomfortable. So personally, I assess the situation. Sometimes I'm like this because, and then sometimes I extend my hand to shake to shake their hand. Okay, it depends on the situation, depends on the person, because some people are, it's actually very interesting, often non-Buddhists are much more sensitive of how to approach a nun than some people who are Buddhists, and the Buddhist men just feel, oh, you're our friend. Okay, so yeah, so it varies according to the person. You have to use your own judgment. Okay, going out in town, what do you do when you're in town? Do you run errands for the monastery, or do you go to McDonald's and buy a side of chips because nobody's seeing you? Okay, and is that? I mean, for example, because we here have a policy, we don't eat food that hasn't been offered to us. So you're outside the monastery. Nobody's looking. Everybody goes to McDonald's and gets chips. Well, almost. So can I go do that? Nobody's going to notice. And so there's so many activities like this where we really have to think about if we do certain things, what kind of habit pattern are we setting up, and what kind of pattern appearance are we giving to the laity? Mm-hmm. There's no precept against going to rodeos and sports events and things like this, and the cinema. There's no precepts. There's a precept about singing, dancing, and playing music, which we can see refers to entertainment, but entertainment isn't explicitly mentioned. Yeah, and so OJ's playing. Let's go. Not OJ. Who is it nowadays? I don't know, some other big back of some sort. I still don't understand football. Yeah. So is that okay? What does that do to our minds to watch a football game? Yeah. And yeah, what does it do to our minds? How are we spending our time? Yeah. You're on a plane, and there's the what do you call it when they sell things on the plane? Yeah, duty free. Yeah, and so they have the duty free brochure, and I see on the plane a lot. I mean, people just pick it up and look through it. So is that you're a Sangha member on a plane? Should you be looking through the duty free thing? Probably other people, they don't notice, they don't care. They might. You don't know. They might notice and wonder, what's this person doing? Yeah. But what does it do to your mind to look through the duty thing. Or look at the ads in magazines. Yeah? Does it help your mind in your practice or not? Okay. So there's all these kinds of things that there aren't specific precepts about, but we need to be attentive to. At one of our monastic gatherings, there was a young monk who lived with us for a while, and he was riding in the car from the airport up to the site of the teachings with a bunch of Theravada monks. And the Theravada monks are known for, very strict Vinaya. It's like, they won't come within, 4 feet of me. And, very strict. And yet, he was telling us on the entire car ride up there, they were discussing their, I don't know which device it was that was popular at that time, if it was smartphones or iPads or, but the latest device or tablets, and they were all talking about that. He didn't have one, because we're not allowed to go on, have Facebook and all that kind of stuff. But they were all talking about, it has this feature and it has this feature. Does yours have that kind of feature? What kind of smartphone do you have, and this and that? And he said he was just like so surprised because they're known for being very strict. And yet, boy, that was really a very attractive, desirable object that they were discussing a lot about. Okay. And so, again, what does that do to your mind? And what does that do to the lay people? Especially at that time, I don't think so many people had those particular kind of devices. And so, these things were given to Sangha members because, by the lay people, because the lay people respected them. But then if the Sangha members are having more modern devices than the lay people and are spending their time talking about the features on their devices and which device is better, then again, what does it do to your mind and how does it look to the lay people? Okay, so, it's not just about, okay, there's a bunch of rules here and, how can I, you want to be like Paul Manafort, how can I, do this so that, the $5 million or $50 million I made counseling the ex-Ukrainian president that got accidentally, deliberately put in an offshore account. How can I legally not pay taxes on it? Yeah. And then, if we adopt that kind of rule or that kind of mentality towards the precepts, it's like, I want to do this, but how can I get around it so that I don't actually break the precept? With our conniving mind, our conniving mind, then somehow we're missing the fact that the precepts were set up to benefit us. They're set up as trainings. They're not set up as you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do the next thing. Okay? Because anyway, who wants to live in a system of just can't do, you're bad because you did? That's not a way to practice a spiritual path. That all these things are created to help us. And so if we find that we're going like this, then we need to step back and say, is the Buddha setting this up? Was the Buddha's motivation to make me feel trapped? Was the Buddha's motivation to confine my activities? Yeah, is that why the Buddha set up these precepts? He's trying to stifle me? I mean, come on. Yeah, we all know that's not true. So if that wasn't the Buddha's motivation, and the Buddha's full of compassion, and he set up these precepts, then how, what mental state is he dealing with? And how can I, train my mind to subdue certain mental states and encourage others? Yeah. And so in that way, we look at really how can keeping that precept benefit me, and how can it benefit the existence of the Buddha Dharma by creating peace with the other people I'm around and not being something offensive to the lay people. Does that make some sense to you? What's going on? So it's not can't do's. It's not a bunch of rules. It's that's why it's much better, and why we had a discussion about this at one of our monastic conferences. Translating them as vows is really incorrect. Yeah, because vow is, it's a very Catholic kind of thing, and vow has the sense of thou shalt not do this, okay, coming from an external authority. And that if you if you break it, then all hell breaks loose. Yeah. Whereas what we're doing is we're following trainings, guidelines, precepts, things that are set up to benefit us. And like I said yesterday, if we could keep them 100% perfectly, we wouldn't need to take them. Yeah. And so to see these as like things that are going to help us along the path, not things to wiggle around, okay, but things that can act as a mirror and help us examine our own mind. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's also the question, and I'm going off on divergence today, but these are important points, that the way some of the precepts are written fit very well for ancient Indian society, but they don't fit so well for our society. So we have to, we can keep the precepts very literally, and some people do, and that's fantastic for them. But I think sometimes if you keep the precepts literally, it actually would invoke criticism from the lay people today, or be very inconvenient to the lay people today. So, for example, if we have the precept to finish eating by midday, okay, so to do that, the planning and organization of your whole day has to center around the meal. Okay, and if you keep it, the precept in such a way that you don't cook and other people have to bring you food and offer it specifically into your hands, they can't just leave it there. Then, for us living here, people would have to drive from Spokane or Coeur d'Alene or Sandpoint, where most of the local people live. Each place is an hour and 15 minutes away. Somebody would have to drive here. Well, they would have to cook at home, drive here every morning, offer the food to us, and we would have to finish eating it by 12. Okay? I think this would be very inconvenient for the lay people. And I think because a lot of the people who support the Abbey, well, first of all, they work. It would be very inconvenient. They can't take time off work to cook lunch and drive an hour, 2 hours coming here and going back to bring it to us. And also, these are people who care about the effect of our actions on the environment. And they're saying, here every day there's a car trip from a city to the Abbey to deliver lunch and back again. And look at the carbon imprint we're having on the planet by driving when we don't need to drive, or driving unnecessarily. And they own SUVs, which are gas guzzlers. Yeah. So if the Buddha were alive today, would he support all this kind of driving? Would he support the lay people in having to take time off of work to cook lunch and bring it up here? I don't think so. Buddha was very sensitive to the needs of the lay people. Okay, so that's why, we cook our own food, and also the structure of the day. We have lunch at 12 or 12:30, and we don't. We're on daylight savings time, and in the winter we don't turn our clock back, so we're always an hour ahead. But we have the BBC talk before lunch, so sometimes we don't always finish before midday. Yeah. In my mind, that's not a problem. We finish. Many of us eat in the evening for health reasons. Yeah, so there's a reason for it. But I think it entails being practical. We have to do different work that involves going outside, checking with county authorities and state authorities and such. Their offices are open 9 to 12. If we have lunch at 10:30, it's going to be very difficult to get the work done with the offices that we need to in the morning. Okay? So there's certain ways that you have to adopt things nowadays. Yeah. There's a precept that nuns don't go out alone. Yeah, because in ancient Indian society, women were never out alone. If you were, it meant that you were a prostitute, and that's what they usually called the nuns to insult them, as they called them prostitutes. So to avoid that, nuns always had to go out in pairs. So clearly nowadays, that in some situations it would be very difficult if during the day, every time somebody had to go somewhere, you had to have two people. So we said, okay, if you're going to the doctor or dentist, if you're doing errands for the Abbey, you can go out alone in daylight hours. But as soon as it's dark, then two people need to be together, because if you have car trouble, on one of these back roads, and the people in this area carry guns, you're going to want a companion, and you're going to want a phone with you for safety reasons. Okay? So people don't go out alone. There has to be two people. And because we do things gender equal, the same policies in place for the monks as well. So the monks also have to have a companion when going out and when it's dark. And we do our best so that we don't have a monk and a nun solo in a car together, because then again people look at it and say, oh, there's a monk, a nun going out to get. Nowadays, sometimes there's two nuns, and people look and go, oh, there's two nuns going out with what is, So it's hard nowadays. Everybody can see something wrong. Okay, so there's these kinds of ways where you really have to think about what is the purpose of the precept, and how can I keep it in today's culture. Yeah. And to know that, then we have to really think about what is to read the stories, because the stories give us a clue about the situations and also the mental states that the Buddha is really concerned about. Okay? So that's the end of my my double going off an extreme. Yeah.
These decisions are made by people who have a lot of years in the Vinaya, too, because it would be foolish to think that we could do that as young monastics.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. Yeah, that these how we adjust things, that decision's made by people with many, many years of living in ordination. Because the thing is, when you're new, I mean, well, we were talking about this yesterday, how our mind just, justifies everything, and it makes excuses for everything, and makes it okay to do whatever our attachment wants to do. And so, this is why you need to be in a community and receive training, so that you really know how to keep the precepts, and then so that you know how to keep the precepts, and you know what to do and not do by following the example of the elders. Because when we're new in the Dharma, our discriminating wisdom is often lacking, and it takes many years to develop it. And as soon as you think, now I have perfect discriminating wisdom, something's going to come out of left field and smack you, and you're going to collapse. Okay, so it's something where we always have to be very, very careful. Yeah. But it's true, and I've had a lot of experience living in communities. When I lived in Dorjipomo Monastery in France for some years, and everybody there was relatively new. I think the people ordained the longest were like 5-6 years ordained, 7 years ordained, and that's still, relatively new. And new people would constantly come and want to change the policies. Yeah. And, move in. Well, I'm a nun now. I can make decisions. And I think that it should be okay to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And that it doesn't work well. Yeah. It doesn't work well at all because we don't have the experience. And also, we need to be trained. We need to be trained. It's really quite important. And it's difficult, especially if people ordain and then they live on their own. Then they say, well, I've been ordained 1 year, 2 years. I'm still a monk nun. So I know what to do. And then after that, it's very difficult for them to receive training because there's a certain sense of arrogance that has set in, or complacency that has set in. And so that's why, especially at the beginning, it's really important. And that's why the Vinaya says that you should stay with your teacher, at least 5 years, if not 10. Yeah, and really at 5 years too, you don't, you think you know a lot. Yeah, but then when you're older and you look back, it's like at 16, remember how at age 16 we were almost Buddhas? We knew everything at age 16. Our parents couldn't tell us anything. And then how, as you get older, remarkably, it seems like your parents have gotten smarter. Yeah. And what's really happening is we're realizing that they knew what they were talking about, and we get a little bit humbler. Life beats us up a little bit. Well, it's the same kind of thing when when you're young in monastic years. It's like, well, I did it. Now I can, interpret Vinaya the way I want, and I can make my own rules, and I get to sit in front. Yeah, I always joke at His Holiness's teachings, you know who the newly ordained people are, because they're the ones who go for the very front. Yeah. Yeah, and leave the seniors and, just to kind of find their way. Yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, shall we get back to Sudina? Okay. So the Buddha's talking to him. How could you go forth in such a well-proclaimed dharma and training and not be able for life to practice the perfectly complete and pure spiritual life? Have I not taught the dharma in many ways for the sake of dispassion? And then we go back. Sorry, there's places where it has dots, and you should go back to the previous. Have I not taught the Dharma in many ways for the sake of dispassion, not for the sake of passion, for the sake of freedom from bondage, not for the sake of bondage, for the sake of non-grasping, not for the sake of grasping? When the Dharma has been taught by me for the sake of dispassion, how can you be intent upon passion? When the Dharma has been taught from the sake of freedom from bondage, how can you be intent on bondage? When the Dharma has been taught for the sake of non-grasping, how can you be intent upon grasping? Have I not in many ways declared the abandoning of sense pleasures? Has not the Dharma been taught in many ways for the waning of passion, for the subduing of intoxication, for the restraint of desire, for the abolition of clinging, for the annihilation of the round of existence, for the destruction of craving, for fading away, for cessation, for extinguishment? Have I not in many ways declared the abandonment of sense pleasures, the abolishing of thirst for sense pleasures, the elimination of thoughts of sense pleasures, the stilling of the fever of sense pleasures? Yeah, would it be better, foolish man, for your male organ to enter the mouth of a terrible and poisonous snake than to enter a woman? That's a statement, not a question. It would be better. It would be better for your male organ to enter the mouth of a black snake than to enter a woman. It would be better for your male organ to enter a charcoal pit, burning, a blaze, a fire, than to enter a woman. Okay, so this isn't because of anti-women things. It's against attachment and passion. And he explains here, why is that? Because for that reason you might die or experience deadly suffering, but you would not on that account, at the breaking up of the body after death, be reborn in the plane of misery, a bad destination, the abyss, hell. Okay, so why is he telling him, it would be better that your male organ enter the mouth of a poisonous snake than enter a woman? It's because when you have sexual desire, it so captivates the mind, and so it brings up so many afflictions at that moment and afterwards that somebody winds up creating an incredible negative karma. Okay, so many people don't like to hear this, but if you look at how many scandals there are written up in the newspaper almost daily, about people who have no control or respect for appropriate use of sexuality. I mean, there's the whole Me Too movement nowadays, now there's also it's us too for men, because it's been revealed that one doctor at Ohio State University had, in the name of treating all these big heavyweight wrestlers, was actually sexually abusing them. And the guys, they didn't even realize it was sexual abuse, and now they're realizing it, and they're coming out and saying it. We look at many years ago, the whole thing about child sexual abuse. We look at people having affairs. How many politicians have been brought down by affairs, by sexting, by going to prostitutes? I mean, it's like happening all the time. Look at the scandals in the Buddhist community. What happened at Rigpa? What happened at Shambhala? Okay? And so what the Buddha is saying is not that sex is bad and dirty, but when you have attachment to it, your mind gets really uncontrolled and does all sorts of things it wouldn't normally do. Yeah, and you look at domestic abuse. It's based on sexual attachment, then people trying to control the woman, and you wind up with awful domestic abuse, and very high statistics. I can't remember them, but most women are killed or raped by people they know, not by some stranger in the bushes waiting for them. So the whole point is, and it's said in the scriptures, the sexual attachment, it's related to all of our senses, through hearing, seeing the object that we're attached to, hearing their voice, smelling their perfume, kissing them, taste, and of course the tactile sense. And then the imagination steps in, and then, we're off and running, and, all sorts of things going on in the mind. And then that comes out in behavior, inappropriate sexual relationships. And, it's interesting that it's only in the recent decades that a lot of this is coming out. It used to be just adultery, yeah. And then my generation came along, and we said, well, if it feels good, do it, so get rid of adultery. Let's not even consider adultery problem making. But if you look, it breaks up families, and it creates so much messes in families. And now, Me Too and Us Too and domestic violence and childhood abuse. And, a lot of these things are coming out now. Anyway, the point that the Buddha is making here is that when we follow afflictions, the result is worse for us than any kind of suffering that we can imagine in this life. Okay? In other words, afflictions are the real enemy, not another person. Okay? So that's why it's not about blaming women here. And similar, and it could be, it's taught for a straight audience. It could be whoever it is you're sexually attracted to. Okay? But that person cannot bring you down in the same way that your own afflicted, uncontrolled mind can. In the same way, regarding like the precept for killing, someone who comes and beats you up cannot cause you to be reborn in the lower realms, but our own afflictions can cause us to be born in the lower realms. Okay, is this getting are you understanding this? Shantideva talks about this very eloquently in Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, and he really emphasizes that no outside person, no outside situation can harm us as much as our own afflictions can harm us. No external person, no matter what they say, how much they criticize you, rip you to shreds verbally, no matter how much they beat you up or even kill you, they cannot make us go to the lower realms. They cannot make us have a bad rebirth. And a bad rebirth is something that lasts a really long time. Getting beat up or having hurt feelings in this lifetime compared to how long living in a bad rebirth is, it's nothing what happens in this lifetime. And so it's the afflictions that cause us to be reborn in all these unfortunate realms, not the external situation. Okay, so that's why the Buddha is talking like this to him, you know. Kind of better to do this thing with the snake than to let your mind get so out of control. Okay. For this reason, at the breakup of the body after death, you might be reborn in the plane of misery, a bad destination, the abyss, hell. Okay. So he's saying this to Sudina out of compassion because he doesn't want him to have that kind of rebirth. Foolish man, you have practiced what is contrary to the true Dharma, the common practice, the low practice, the coarse practice, that which ends in a wash. Here, a wash means outcast, or it means like an outpouring of afflictions. You have practiced what is done in private, that which is done wherever there are couples. You are the forerunner, the first performer of many unwholesome things. Ugh. Can you imagine the Buddha saying that to you? It would not give rise to confidence in those without it, nor increase the confidence of those who have it, but it will hinder confidence in those without it, and it will cause some with confidence to change their minds. So, as explained yesterday, it won't increase faith in people who don't have faith in the Dharma, and it won't give rise to faith in people who don't have faith. It won't increase the faith of those who do, and to the contrary, it will decrease the faith of those who have faith in the Dharma, and it will hinder those who don't have it from gaining that kind of confidence. Then the master, having rebuked Venerable Sudina in various ways, spoke in dispraise of being difficult to support and maintain, in dispraise of great desires, lack of contentment, socializing, and laziness. But he spoke in praise of various ways of being easy to support and maintain, of desiring little, contentment, self-effacement, ascetic practices, serenity, decrease of defilements, and of the putting forth of energy. Having given a Dharma talk on what was right and seemly, he then addressed the monks. And before I read that, I'm going to go back because there's a lot in that paragraph. Okay, so the Buddha spoke in dispraise of being difficult to support and maintain, and in praise of various ways of being easy to support and maintain. So this is one of the stock passages. You could tell there's certain passages that come over and over again, and this is one of them, and there's usually some reason why they come over and over again. Okay, so monastics, are we going to be easy to support and maintain, or are we going to be prima donnas? Okay, such that the laity, like, I can't eat this, and I can't eat this, and this bed's too hard, and that bed's too soft, and, can I have slippers, but not these kind of slippers. I want those kind of slippers. And the water is too cold. The water is too hot. And, we can be, because the lay people make offerings and care for us in many ways, sometimes we can be, if we're very demanding, then we are difficult to support and maintain. And we become a headache for the lay people. And then, of course, the lay people don't want to support and maintain because, the Sangha is always asking, I want this, I want that, and especially this and not that. And so it just creates a very bad feeling. It's interesting working around that. People call and they say, what kind of food do you need? So if somebody asks, what kind of food do you need? Then it's fine. We can say, we need this and this and this and this. Okay. But we don't want to go into, and bring a double fudge chocolate Sara Lee cake that is, 1 foot in diameter. Okay, diameter. We don't give instructions like that. Yeah, because that's just, that's being difficult to support and maintain, isn't it? That's being a headache. One person came here and he was very upset because we eat eggs, unfertilized eggs. We don't take any fertilized eggs. And we drink milk. And he was very upset because these were not from free-range cows and free-range chickens. And he thought we should definitely, if we ate those things, it should be free-range. And even better is we don't eat them. Okay. And I tried to explain to him that, we are completely dependent on other people for our food. And free-range eggs and milk cost much more than standard eggs and milk. And it's not becoming for the Sangha to eat food that our supporters wouldn't even buy for themselves because the food is so expensive. Yeah. I tried to explain that to him. He was just very fixated on his idea. But, it's really true. If people call and say, what do you need? And then we start listing all sorts of expensive stuff, then that's not right for the supporters because they wouldn't even buy it for themselves. Yeah. And so similarly, I think, when we build, we should not have lavish things because the donors wouldn't even have that for themselves. Many people live in very simple apartments. So, okay. So the Buddha spoke in dispraise of great desires and lack of contentment, and in praise of desiring little and being content. And that's really a practice, to be content with what we receive. And, it's a difficult practice. When the lunch line, it isn't exactly the food you like. Yeah. You eat it anyway. Okay. When somebody offers you something, it may not be exactly what you need, exactly the kind of socks you like or whatever it is. But you wear them anyway, or you give them away to somebody else who can wear them. Okay. The Buddha spoke in dispraise of laziness, and he spoke in praise of self-effacement, ascetic practices. Okay, so, laziness, complacency, lying around, not fulfilling our part of the bargain, so to speak, because the way the Buddha set it up, the Sangha depends on the lay people for support. The lay people depend on the Sangha for teachings. But if people support us and we don't practice well, then actually in another sutra, the Buddha says you might as well be drinking hot molten iron if you accept the offerings and eat the food, but without keeping your precepts and doing your practice. The Buddha didn't pull any punches, and he didn't want the Sangha being a bunch of prima donnas and spoiled brats. Okay, so the Buddha spoke in support of self-effacement. So monastics should not be proud and arrogant. We should be humble. We shouldn't be, I'm a monastic walking, through, and, I should go in the front of the line before you, and, I should have the better seat before you, and all that kind of stuff. That's not the way the Buddha wants monastics to behave. He spoke in praise of serenity, developing concentration, in praise of the decrease of defilements, so really working with our minds and decreasing our defilements, and of the putting forth of energy. In other words, to have joyous effort in doing the Dharma practice. And Dharma practice should be done with joyous effort. If we reach a point in our practice where it's like, God, I have to do this, then we need to really stop and like what's going on in my mind if I see doing my practices as a chore instead of something that is going to benefit me. So it's true, sometimes at the end of the day, and you have to finish your commitments very quickly, and it seems like a chore, but you always have the idea, I promised this to my teachers to do. I may be exhausted and all I want to do is go to sleep, but doing this is going to benefit me. And so you do it, even though you may not do it perfectly. Okay. So, having given a Dharma talk on what is right and seemly, he addressed the monks. On this account, monks, I will lay down a training rule. So you see, he doesn't call them vows. He calls them training rules. I will lay down a training rule for the monks for the following 10 reasons. And here he gives 10 reasons, and we're going to go into, I'll keep reading so that we finish this sutra, and then we'll go back and look at these 10 reasons in more depth. Okay? So these are the reasons why he's setting up the training rules. For the well-being of the Sangha, for the comfort of the Sangha, for the restraint of recalcitrant people, for the ease of well-behaved monks, for the restraint of corruptions that pertain to the present life, and for the warding off of corruptions that pertain to future lives, to give rise in confidence to those without it, and to increase the confidence of those who have it, for the continuation of the true Dharma, and for supporting the training. And monks, this training rule should be recited thus. If a monk has sexual intercourse, he is expelled and not in communion. Okay. And then, as other things happened, then the Buddha set up other conditions he clarified the meaning of the initial precept because other conditions arose. Okay, so the next story, it's not printed out here, but the next story basically is there's one monk who's living in seclusion, and there's one female monkey, and he feeds the female monkey every day and then has sex with her. Yeah, if you think people do weird things now, they did pretty weird things at the Buddhist time too. So then, it was added to this precept, even with an animal. So when we recite it, if a monastic has sexual intercourse, even with an animal, then and so on and on. So with all the precepts, as different events happened, then the precepts received sometimes exceptions to them when something would be allowable, and then sometimes clarifications, really saying, okay, this means da, 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 and avoid those things. Okay. Let's pause here. Are there questions or comments so far?
A question with regard to the refraining from awakening any sexual energy as long as there is still attachment to it.
Mm-hmm.
With respect to Tantra practice. Then I wonder, hearing that, if it wouldn't be better for monastics to refrain from doing, taking bliss into the past until they have some really proper training or some understanding of emptiness. Because otherwise they would use these energies that they're at the same time trying to refrain. It would seem confusing for anyone who doesn't have some almost realization of emptiness, actually, or very good training. Yeah,
or very good renunciation.
Right.
Yeah. I completely agree with you, and that's why in India, Tantra was considered a secret practice. It wasn't for everybody, and it was for people who had, renunciation and bodhicitta and some understanding of emptiness, because you're absolutely right. That's what happens. And I think that's what is behind some of the scandals that we hear about. And it's behind some of the disrobings, too. Yeah. You bring it up, and yeah. Yeah. And so unless you really understand Tantra well, and, unless you can really use that energy to realize emptiness, then it can be very difficult for a monastic. Yeah.
I understand it wasn't a vow at the time, but was there a need for him to purify that, even though it wasn't a vow?
Oh, you bet.
So did the Buddha tell him how to purify? Or?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Within the precepts, there are some precepts that govern naturally negative actions, and then for some precepts, the action is just one proscribed, meaning, the Buddha said, don't do it. Okay. So the precepts such as having sex and killing, stealing, lying, those are naturally negative, meaning that almost anybody who did that, except maybe an Arya, would have a mind that's afflicted. Okay? If you have precepts and you do that, you create the negative karma from doing the naturally negative action. And even if you don't have precepts, you create the negative karma from doing a naturally negative action. If you have precepts, then you create the dig drip, the kind of stain or the downfall. Yeah, maybe downfall. You created an offense. That's what it is. That's the word I'm looking for. Okay? So the offense means that, or downfall is another translation, it means that the Buddha proscribed doing that, but you did it. Okay? So there's two different ways for purifying. If it's a naturally negative action, you have to purify the destructive karma by, let's say, the Vajrasattva meditation, the 35 Buddhas, essentially what we call the four opponent practices. In Chinese, it's the repentance ceremony. Okay, and then the offense part or downfall part gets purified by doing the posada practice, which is the fortnightly confession and restoration of precepts that the Sangha does. Okay, but then there's other precepts. So in the case of those four that I listed, those four are naturally negative actions, and then there are also there are precepts prescribed, where the Buddha prescribed doing those actions. For something like not abandoning eating in unsuitable hours, then that's not naturally negative. It's something that's prescribed by the Buddha. Okay. Of course, if you eat with attachment, then the attachment can make it negative. But just the action of eating at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 6 o'clock in the evening, that itself isn't naturally negative, but it is prescribed by the Buddha. Okay.
I've heard His Holiness saying that nowadays monks such as himself visualize the consort regarding Tantra instead of actually engaging in the act. But where's the actual evidence that Tantra was taught by Buddha Shakyamuni? I was curious about that.
Yeah. I'm not going to be able to present any actual evidence that there was a newspaper report that said at such and such a time the Buddha manifested at Vajradhara at the land of Drepung and taught such and such a Tantra. You know, I can't do that.
There's no sutras or there's no sutras that go back close to the time of the original Sangha that mention Tantra?
You know, there's certain sutra practices. For example, in Chinese Buddhism, the Amitabha practice is a sutra practice. Also in Tibetan, it can be sutra or Tantra. When you look at some of these practices, let's say that are sutra practices of Manjushri, Amitabha, you know, they're Mahayana sutras, then you can see that it's not difficult to go from there to Tantra. Okay? It's not difficult to go from there. And in terms of philosophy, you know, in Sutra, you talk a lot about the mind that realizes emptiness. And if you go deep enough in that way, that leads you to the tantric explanation of the different levels of mind and the explanation of the fundamental innate mind of clear light, you know, which lies behind the whole philosophy behind Tantra. Okay, so Tantra isn't just doing these sadhanas and visualizing things and reciting mantras and so on. It's actually a system to get you to realize emptiness with the extremely subtle mind. Okay? In terms of you know, consort practice, there's very few people who are actually able to do it. Yeah. And this is part of the problem and the degeneration that happens now, is that people say, well, I took a tantric initiation, so that means I can go and do these things. And, you know, it clearly shows that they haven't studied, you know, they don't know the limits, you know, when you're keeping tantric precepts, how to keep them properly. So either they don't know, or they know but they just don't care, or they're inflated with arrogance and they think they're somehow special. Or for whatever other reason that people do things that I don't understand. Okay? But His Holiness always talks about if somebody gets to that level, and it's quite an advanced level to be able to use an actual consort, it's very advanced. If somebody gets to that level, then they should disrobe, and then quietly, unostentatiously, do their practice. But, now what you see is, it's craziness. It's craziness. Yeah. And very, very harmful. Yeah.